Okay, well, while we're waiting on that, I'm going to go ahead and get started with the material. Today we are, well, first off, in this module we are discussing communication. We're discussing who you are, and we're going into that through reflections on self-concept, perception, self-esteem, and so much more. Awesome. Carissa, if you have any questions at all throughout the meeting, you feel free to type them right there. I'm going to leave it up on the screen so I can see just in case. So in this module, like I said, we're talking about who you are. And I think that's a good question because I think we all, personally know who we are as a person. But when we start looking at it from a self-concept standpoint, from a perception standpoint, self-esteem, and so much more, then we learn more about ourselves and the perceptions that we give off to other people. So what we have on the agenda today is, of course, the burning question of who you are. We're also going to look at modern communication, and I'm going to give you a fabulous example from Facebook profiles because I think that will really just highlight some of the points I want to make in regards to self-concept, perception, and so much more. We're going to discuss the looking glass self. Also another question of, so how is self-concept developed? We're going to look at self-control and self-esteem in interpersonal communication, personality and perception, as well as improving intrapersonal communication. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in. Like I said, the question of who you are. Who are you? If someone were to ask you to tell them a little bit about yourself, what would you say? Well, really, in all honesty, it sounds like a simple question, but if you really get to thinking about it, you have to go, well, how would I approach that question? There's a lot of different ways that you could approach that question. Well, that's because we have to look at our own self-concept, and our self-concept can be defined as an appraisal of our own attributes and our own competencies. So for most of us, our self-concept is made up of several different components. It could be things such as your opinions, how you look physically, how you perform academically, how you behave in social situations, and so much more. You might even reflect on the roles you play in your life. So if someone were to ask me the question of who you are, I can really approach that from a lot of different ways. I might say, well, I am someone who is, I'm 5'5", I've got brown hair, I've got green eyes, so I could talk about the physical attributes. I could jump into academic accomplishments and talk about that. I could talk about the fact that although I appear to be an extrovert, and I think I talked about this in our previous meeting, I appear to be an extrovert, in that I mean that I appear to be this person that's just like a social butterfly and very outgoing and so forth. I'm actually more of an introvert if you were to know me. So I prefer to be home alone. I prefer alone time. Those are things that I truly treasure. So, these are all different things that I could talk about. And I could also, as far as the self-concept standpoint goes, I could reflect on the roles that I play in my life. I could say, I'm a sister, I'm a daughter, I'm a wife, I am, an aunt, I am all of these different things. So when we look at self-concept, our appraisal of ourselves could change just depending on how you would describe yourself. And while we might believe that each of us has developed our own self-concept solely on our own beliefs, the fact of the matter is that really self-concept is actually learned and it's maintained through interpersonal communication that we have with other people. And our self-concept actually changes based off the communication that we have with other people. Now you might be thinking, what in the world is she talking about? Well, how you evaluate your skills and your abilities, how you perceive things and situations in the world around you, your personal values and beliefs, even the language choices that you have, they give off your self-concept. So they affect how you communicate, how others perceive you, and so much more. And through our communication with other people, both our nonverbal communication that we've talked about before and our verbal communication and our nonverbal communication, we can influence how others perceive us. So just because someone has a certain perception of us based off the language choices that we make and the values that we've shown and so forth, that doesn't mean that has to be a steadfast way that we're perceived by everybody. That can always change. All right, so with that in mind, I want to take a look at this. Facebook profiles. Facebook is something that I would say most people in our society have nowadays. And so I think it makes a very relevant real-world example of how we can be perceived by others. So how do you see yourself, and how do you want other people to see you? Well, social networking sites such as Facebook allow us to really think about these things. When we set up our Facebook profiles, which for many of us has been many years ago now, because it's been a while for some, it's been available for so long, we had to make certain choices when we set those profiles up. So we had to look at the core things that people might want to know about us. So a lot of times when we set up our Facebook profiles, we enter things such as our gender, our birthday. Some of us go further and put our occupations, our education, where we've been educated, where we graduated from, and so forth. And then we might even take it a step further, and we might say, what is our favorite television show, and what is our favorite quotes, what are our favorite films, do we have a political preference, a certain religion, so many other things that we go into there. So when we set these profiles up, we're trying to project a certain image. We're trying to say, this is who I am. These are my core values. This is how I operate. And then after we set up our profiles, then we go a little deeper. So we choose the people that we want to identify with and the groups that we want to join. And I always urge my students to really consider that. Again, our Facebook profiles set up a digital footprint online. Whether we want it to or not, it's there. So when we decide that we want to have certain friends as our Facebook friends, or we want to join certain groups, or we want to post certain things online, we always have to consider the fact that whatever we post, whatever we do, is a digital footprint. And it's something that, I just want to touch on this for a second, but it's something that employers do look at from a hiring standpoint. While you might think everything on your profile page is completely secret, well, it's not really. It does create a digital footprint. So when we interview for jobs and when we do things like that, a lot of times employers will pull up your social media accounts and just say, okay, who is this person? What are their favorite quotes? What are their favorite films? What kind of political preferences do they have, and so forth? What are they posting on their page? Are they posting the memes with the foul language? Are they posting pictures of them doing a lot of partying and things like that? We leave a digital footprint. So we have to consider, how do we want other people to perceive us, even outside of our friends network? And that even goes a step further, like I was saying here, about who do you want to identify with? What friends do you have on there? What groups are you a part of, and so forth. So you might want to ask yourself if this is someone I want others to see as considered as my friend. And I'll tell you, I often go through my Facebook friends list, and I kind of delete people off of there, because I go, well, this person's posting things that I feel are not accepting of others, or just things like that. And so I do clean up a lot, and I eliminate things that I don't necessarily want to be associated with. And it even leads us to questions such as, do I really want to join my my high school alumni group, or this certain do I want to friend this certain page? All those things have to be taken into consideration, because they represent how you're projecting yourself and how you want other people to see you. All right, so we could go on for that for a little bit. So I'm going to try to keep it going here. You also want to consider hobbies and interests, which affect and even reflect how you see yourself. So on our Facebook profiles, a lot of times we post things, along the lines of, are you a runner? Are you an artist? Are you a fan of certain musicians, and so forth? This communicates who we are, and it gives off that perception that I talked about before. We have to consider the pictures that you post of yourself, and also how they show you in certain situations. And if that's something that you want to say about yourself, if that's something that you want to put out there. The combination of these items that you post on your Facebook page, and it's not just limited to Facebook. It could be things you do on Twitter, tweets you do. It could be Instagram, all these different things that we have out there nowadays. But Facebook's something that's a great example, in my opinion, because it's something that more and more people have. It has a lot more members than other social media networking sites. So the combinations of items that you post on your page, including the shared posts that you make, the posts that you make that you share and you put on your profile, they present an image of yourself. They present how you like to think about yourself, what you want to say about yourself. and how people want to perceive you or how you want them to perceive you. So that's really something to think about. And on that note, at the close of this meeting, if you go check out your Facebook page, then feel free to delete some stuff, right? All right, so we'll move on. But the looking glass self. This week, we're talking about the looking glass self. And as I previously stated in our other meetings, humans are social beings. We're social by nature. We are not wired to be alone all the time. And early 20th century American sociologist Charles Horton Cooley believed that people always see themselves in relation to other people. So your sense of self is formed by imagining how you appear to other people. We describe this as the looking glass self. So in other words, you see yourself from others' perspectives. It's pretty interesting to think about. When you see yourself in the mirror or think about yourself, you may be pleased or even displeased by what you see, but not simply because it does or does not reflect what you want to be like. You might also imagine how other people will judge you. A lot of times, this judgment creates feelings such as pride or even embarrassment or even humiliation. And I want to try to give you an example. For example, if in the presence of just a beautiful person, you may feel that you're not as beautiful as they are. Or in the presence of someone that you feel is less fashionable than you, you might feel more fashionable or sophisticated. We're often most affected by the judgments of other people, especially in authoritative positions in our life. So a lot of times we're affected by the judgments of our parents, our teachers, our bosses, and so forth. Because, like I said, your sense of self is formed by imagining how you appear to others. You see yourself from others' perspectives. So if someone in an authoritative position in your life, a parent, a teacher, a boss, so forth, says that you are something that is not necessarily a positive thing, it affects how you perceive yourself. It can really damage our self-esteem on a certain level. Now, you might be one of those people that think they're not affected by what other people think, and I applaud you. You should definitely try to brush off what other people think of you. But when you say things such as, I don't care what other people's opinions are, that doesn't necessarily mean that you not considered what they've said. Because we always take it into consideration. We always hear these things, and it's just a matter of did we absorb it or not. So, in fact, to come to this decision of you don't care what other people think, you had to make a conscious choice to disregard the statement that they made about you, whatever it was. So instead of shame about something, you might actually choose not to allow yourself to be bothered by the opinions of other people. Or you actually, some people even feel pride about disobeying the rules of society, whatever that rule might be. However, Cooley believes that the thought of other people is always there. So no matter if you choose to accept and take in what that person said about you, or if you've chosen to disregard it and say, you know what, I'm not going to listen to that. I don't care what that person's opinion is. No matter what's going on there, you still retain that information nonetheless, which is not always a good thing. But so how is our self-concept developed? And if you remember, we talked about how on the previous slide, I just kind of want to shoot back here for a moment. We talked about how self-concept is an appraisal of our own attributes and our own competencies. So our self-concept is made up of how we would describe ourselves physically, academically, socially, and so much more. So jumping back over here again, how is our self-concept developed? Well, in 1983, psychologist Michael Argyle provided a summary of 4 key concepts that contribute to how we personally develop our self-concept, how that self-concept is ultimately developed. And of these 4 things, he said first, the reaction of others. So the reactions other people give you, that's often how we develop our self-concept. Unfortunately, I have an acquaintance of mine that I saw make a post on Facebook the other day, and I think she's a very lovely person. She's lovely from the inside out, and so that's what makes her a beautiful person. But you know, from a physical standpoint, she made the point that she's been told all of her life by other people that she was not attractive, which makes me sad. It makes me sad that anyone would say that to another person, especially such a wonderful person that she is. And so for her entire life, she's taking that in, and that's become a part of her self-concept. So when she thinks of herself on a physical level, she, because of the reaction of other people that she's had her entire life, she automatically just says, I'm not pretty. So that is a part of her self-concept, which is very, very sad, and we're going to talk about that later on. But the comparisons we make with other people are also part of our self-concept. Throughout her life, again, she's talked about how she's compared herself to her group of friends, and we're actually going to refer to that in just a second. It's called a reference group. So she's compared herself to her reference group, her group of friends, her entire life. And that's how she's also formed that self-concept of not being very physically attractive. Now, I want to take that out of physicalities for a moment. I want to talk about something a little different. Comparisons with other people. I have heard, especially a lot of my students, graduate students that I've worked with and so forth, they compare themselves, as a reference group, they compare themselves to other students. So because they're doing well in their classes, because perhaps they're doing better than certain other students that they know, their peers, then because of that comparison, academically, as far as their self-concept goes, they go, you know what, I'm very intelligent. I am, I'm someone that's very textbook savvy, whatever it might be. So we make comparisons based off these comparisons with other people to form our own self-concept. Now, the social roles we play in society is another key factor that contributes to our self-concept. An example of this would be, I'm a mother and I'm a teacher, so I have to watch my language and behave a certain way. So we develop that self-concept, how we're being portrayed to other people, because of the roles that we play. Because I'm a mother and because I'm a teacher, I really need to behave in this certain way. And also, the fourth key factor that contributes to the development of our self-concept would be the groups in which we identify. And that was what I was talking about in the previous two factors there that I discussed. When you identify with a particular group, which is called a reference group, you tend to compare yourselves with the individuals that are in that group. For example, you may think that you must have certain possessions because others in your reference group have those possessions. Or you must communicate in a certain way because other people in that group communicate in a certain way. For instance, if you're hanging out with a group of friends and everybody kind of uses a lot of slang and so forth, then you might actually, because of the reference group, you might communicate in that certain manner because you want to fit in with that group. If everyone in your group has, I'm trying to think of something. If everyone in the group wears a certain article of clothing, you might want to try to get that article of clothing as well because you want to fit in with your reference group. So the pressures exerted by reference groups explains a lot of the reasons why teenagers often adopt a certain style of dress, use slang expressions and so forth, mainly just because they want to fit in with their reference group. But of course, this is not just for teens, it's for adults too. So self-control and interpersonal communication. Now that you have a little bit better understanding of yourself and the factors that contribute to our own self-concept and our self-image and our self-esteem, I want to ask you the question of how these aspects of yourself affect your communication with other people. So research shows that your ability to interact well with other people is improved if you exercise control of your behavior. So self-control is basically just the ability to regulate what you say and how you act. Self-control is related to strong family bonds and low family conflict a lot of times. Empathy, the ability to understand the perspective of other people, is also associated with self-control. Low levels of anger and aggression and the ability to take responsibility for our own failings is associated with a good level of self-control. So when we have low conflict in our life, especially with our family units, when we have the ability to empathize with other people, And by that, I mean we take the time to understand their perspectives. When we have, we're not quick to jump to anger or aggression, and we really work to take responsibility for things when they don't work out the way we wanted them to, when we fail at something, then we're exercising a higher level of self-control. The capacity to control your emotions, your urges, and your desires has also been shown to result in healthier intimate relationships with significant others, because you're willing and able to sacrifice your own needs for the benefit of your partner and for ultimately your relationship. So when we're able to control our emotions and not, like I said, jump to anger or aggression, when we're able to control our urges and our desires, we have healthier relationships. So self-control is really a big part of our interpersonal communication with others, and also a basis for really great, healthy relationships in our lives. So perhaps, though, the most direct evidence of the importance of self-control are research findings that low self-control often results in abusive, violent, and selfish responses in our intimate relationships, as well as an interest in finding alternative partners. So when we aren't able to have these great family bonds or have low levels of conflict, where we're not able to control our emotions and our anger and our urges and our desires, we often end up in relationships that are somewhat abusive, either physically, emotionally, whatever it might be, sometimes violent or just selfish. I mean, sometimes the worst relationships are just selfish in nature. So when that happens, a lot of times the relationship is not successful because we look for other partners. We're not happy in that relationship. So researchers Ron and Voss conclude the message gleaned from this research is clear. Low self-control is detrimental to having and maintaining close interpersonal relationships, whereas having a high level of self-control, meaning that you can control your emotions, that you have empathy for others, that you try not to have too much unhealthy conflict in your relationships, can actually make relationships just more successful as a whole. All right, so before I move on, I just want to make sure if there are any questions so far. Are we understanding the concepts pretty well? Okay, awesome. No questions. Okay, well, so let's talk about self-esteem and interpersonal communication. Of course, it's desirable for us to have a higher level of self-esteem, but some individuals have such a high opinion of their self-worth, which is not bad, but when we have such a high opinion of our self-worth, sometimes we believe that we're better or we're more deserving or we're just more special than other people. And that is actually what we would call an inflated self-image or an extremely high self-esteem. And when we have that level of inflation in our self-esteem, it really can negatively impact our friendships, our work relationships, and especially our romantic relationships. So researchers have found that people who keep trying to prove their worth focus excessively on themselves and have less successful relationships. I can't tell you how many individuals I've discussed as far as married couples I've discussed this with before. When we try so hard I don't even want to say try so hard, when we have such an inflated level of self-esteem, we keep trying to prove our worth to people. We're this, we're that, look at me, basically. We poison our relationships because, one, we're not being real with the other person, and two, we're not being very connected to the other person. We're so worried with how we're projecting our own worth to other people that we lose that interpersonal communication there within the relationship. Now, on the other hand of this, though, we have people who have a very low self-esteem, and they tend to engage in excessive attempts to seek reassurance from other people. So, if I've heard the flip side of that with relationships and couples, where one person in the couple in the relationship continues to seek acceptance and reassurance in the relationship, when they do that, it can often backfire on them. They tend to push away from people they want most close to them. They might feel that they're not worthy of the relationship because the person with low self-esteem needs constant reassurance in the relationship. Other people get really frustrated. They get irritated and often socially reject that person because it's almost like having someone that you constantly have to pet and reassure and let them know that everything's fine. And after a while, they can get very draining. So, there is a fine balance to self-esteem and interpersonal communication in relationships. Okay, so personality and perception. So after we've now discussed self-concept and self-image and self-esteem, it should be obvious that the statements and the judgments of other people and even your view of yourself can affect your communication with the world around you, with other individuals. Additional factors, though, such as personality and perception, affect how we communicate as well. So basically, our personality can be defined as the combination of traits or qualities such as behavior, our emotional stability, and our mental attributes that make a person unique. Each person has a very unique personality. I know that we often hear the phrase that people use sometimes that say, that person has absolutely no personality whatsoever. Well, of course they do have a personality. It's just might not be in tune to what you like. So for some people, the public self and the private self are the same. They're congruent. The way these individuals behave socially, in a public setting is similar to the way that they would also behave in their private life. I would say that I'm very congruent in my public self and my private self. While the formality level might change a little bit, I think I'm the same person if you've got me in a group of strangers as if you had me at home watching TV on the couch. But for some people, their public personality they display in social situations is very different than the private self that they have. And I liked this quote, so I included this here, but the late television talk show host Johnny Carson, for example, he appeared very sociable and really seemed to enjoy small talk and casual chats with people when he had his television show. But in reality, outside of his television show, outside of his public appearances, he was an extremely private, almost shy person, and he really didn't enjoy small talk at all. So sometimes we have these individuals who, because of their personality, their public self and their private self are two different people. So let's look at personality and perception a little bit deeper here. If you haven't heard about this in your collegiate work so far, you will hear about it. But in the 1940s, there was a mother and daughter team, and this team was Catherine Briggs and Isabel Briggs Myers. So they were a mother and daughter team, and they developed a questionnaire largely inspired by a researcher named Young's work. The Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. You'll hear this in your career, in your college career, in your professional career. You will hear about this if you haven't already. But the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, and it is called actually MBTI. So the MBTI personality inventory is designed to make Young's theory of psychological functions understandable and useful in people's lives. And it does this by providing an explanation of basically 16 distinctive personality types that result from the combination of 4 different psychological functions. Okay, that's a mouthful. So I want to break that down to you. Basically, the MBTI is a personality test. Let's say that. It's a personality test. The Myers-Briggs used different, basically different labels to label different psychological functions. Perhaps you're an extrovert or an introvert, meaning that, and I don't want to go too far in this because I'd like you to check it out in your textbook, and also I've got a little link there for you. But some people are extroverted, some people are introverted. Some people are sensory, some people are intuitive. Some people prefer the logical side of things, thinking. Some people go more emotional with their choices on feeling. And then we have judging and perceiving. So we have all these different ways that our personality can be formed, how we are as a person. And I've got a free link for you there if you want to check it out. It's at the bottom of the screen there. It's http://www.humanmetrics.com/CGI-win/JTYPES2.ASP. Now, you don't have to write all that down, but if you would like to check out the MBTI and do the free personality test just to see where you line up, you can check it out there. Okay, so the MBTI personality inventory, basically it's used to help people understand their personality preferences. For example, some people might be more friendly and expressive or observant than other people. In 1978, we have David Keirsey, who developed the Keirsey Temperament Sorter. And it's a questionnaire that combines MBTI with other terminology that has to do with our personality. So that's a really interesting one, too. And I just talk about these here because it's fun to learn about our own personality. So if you want to check that one out, I also have the link there. You can also find the links to these things. I do want to add that. You will also find the links to these things just by doing a simple Google search online for the Keirsey Temperament Sorter or either MBTI. You can take the free test that way. So just kind of a little fun thing there. So as we've now learned, you cannot completely control your perception of the external environment, the limitations of your physical senses, and the influences of our past experiences with situations. But you are not simply a passer and receiver of stimuli. So through the objects you choose to pay attention to, the ways in which you organize and interpret what you perceive through your senses, and your use of perception checking, we can improve interpersonal communication skills. Now, you might be saying, well, how can we improve our interpersonal communication skills? Well, you first have to increase your self-awareness to understand how you interpret your world. One way that you can increase awareness is just simply to pay attention to what you select to focus on and how you interpret things in your world. You want to ask yourself things such as, or you want to look at things such as your past experiences. How are they influencing your interpretation of a situation? And you also want to look at differences between your past experiences and your present circumstances. So is the glass half full or is it half empty? So let me try to give you an example on that and make this a lot simpler. We can't hang on to past experiences and allow them to affect our present situations. A good example of that would be that I had a recent conversation with a student, and she was talking about how she was in a newer relationship, and she was unable to trust that person fully in the relationship. So I asked that student, I said, is that individual giving you reasons why you shouldn't trust? Have they betrayed you in a certain way? What's causing you not to trust that person? And she told me the reason that she wasn't trusting that person was because she was in a previous relationship in which the significant other was not faithful to her. And by that, we had this long discussion of basically how her past experiences are influencing her current relationship, and that's definitely a no-no. We can't move on in life, and we can't have healthy relationships if we're allowing previous experiences to poison those relationships. So something to kind of keep in mind there. We always want to create awareness and pay attention to the reason of how we're interpreting our world. So I don't think that before that, I don't think she really understood to what level that previous experience was coming over into her present situation. And so when we allow ourselves to think on that level, I think she was able to say, okay, you know what, this person hasn't done anything that is that's caused me not to trust them. What's happening is I'm bringing my baggage from my previous relationship into this relationship, and I can't do that. So when we have the awareness of what's going on there, we're able to stop it. Also, education increases our awareness of ourselves because it's a process of learning to use critical thinking skills and also learning to differentiate between the facts, the opinions, the observations, and other things. So when we have more education on these things, we're able to go, okay, this is a fact, or this is opinion, or well, this is just hearsay, and we're able to have more awareness so we can better understand our world. So another thing is, as we continue to study interpersonal communication, the knowledge we gain about how the communication process operates will increase your awareness of how you and other people communicate with each other. Okay. Another tip here is just to accept yourself. How do we improve interpersonal communication? Remember, interpersonal communication is communication that we have with ourselves. So how do we improve that? Well, we have to accept ourselves. Everyone needs a strong, positive sense of personal identity to serve as an anchor in our life. We have to know who we are, shortcomings and all, and accept ourselves for that. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't change. It just means that we accept ourselves, and that's okay. So your identity is a consistent set of attitudes that defines who you are. It's your subjective self-image, what you tell yourself, what you call yourself, and so forth. So we build our identity and our acceptance of ourselves through what we tell ourselves, okay? So the self-talk that we give to ourselves is how we create that identity. If you accept and like yourself, in spite of all your faults and failings, you're going to be more likely to have a positive attitude in your interpersonal communication with other people. If we can admit and forgive ourselves and our mistakes, we're going to be more likely to allow other people that same forgiveness. So just kind of something to keep in mind there. It all starts with positive self-talk, being accepting and aware of ourselves and our shortcomings. And by doing that, then we can be more accepting of other people as well. So one way of building acceptance of ourselves is to look at how you interpret your own behavior. How realistic are you in appraising your abilities and your behaviors? Do you rationalize or make excuses for unacceptable behavior that you have, or do you fail to give yourself enough credit? Sometimes we don't give ourselves enough credit. I can't tell you how many times I've had students submit papers that they were like, this is terrible, this is my worst work yet, and I always remind them that we are our own worst critics. So give yourself more credit. Don't make excuses for things. If you have a shortcoming or a failing, then you accept that for what it is. For example, if we do well on a test, do you tell yourself that it was just luck, or that the test was easy, or do you attribute your success to hard work and studying? Another way that you build a positive personal identity is through paying attention to the positive feedback from others. So when we pay attention to the positive feedback that we get from other people, we help to build up that positive personal self-identity. Remember that you can choose what you accept and own about yourself or what you reject. So it's your choice. Do you want to accept that negativity, or do you want to embrace that positivity? Some people who receive negative feedback about themselves from other people, when they were children, they carry those negative self-images, kind of like the example I was giving you about the acquaintance of mine who had the individual tell her that she was not beautiful. Well, she carried that negative self-image through her life, unfortunately, and it's become a part of her self-concept. You don't have to be a victim of other people's opinions, though. You can tell yourself, basically, to paraphrase Terry Cole Whitaker, which was an author of a very famous book, what other people think of you is none of your business. So if you really think about that, who cares what other people think of you? It's none of your business. It matters how you perceive yourself. Or, as the other old Southern saying goes, rise above your raising. I've had so many students talk to me about how they were raised and how they weren't raised in a positive environment. And because of that, they were told that they were lesser throughout their childhood for whatever reason. We can rise above our raising. So you are not what other people think of you. You're not necessarily what others have told you that you are.